The U.S. Senate has voted to advance a resolution to block U.S. President Donald Trump from ordering further strikes on Iran.
And this as 4 Republicans joined in voting to discharge a war powers resolution from committee. The 50-47 procedural vote turned out to be a breakthrough for Democrats, even though the measure still faces considerable hurdles before it could force Trump to end the war.
Well, the War Powers Resolution of 1972, which is the law Democrats used to force the vote, requires presidents to remove U.S. forces from any conflict that Congress has not authorized within 60 days. Trump hit the deadline on the 1st of May, but evaded it by claiming that the conflict was effectively over, even though the U.S. continues to enforce a naval blockade on the Strait of Hormuz of Iran. Following the blockade is on Iran. Now, following Tuesday's procedural vote, the Senate still needs to pass the underlying resolution, which may be more difficult if every senator is voting. And the measure would also need to pass in the House, which last week narrowly rejected a similar resolution.
Well, amid this, the U.S. president has renewed threats on Iran. He has warned that the country would strike again just a day after claiming to have held off a major assault in hopes of a peace deal. Listen to this.
So they called up, they had heard I made the decision. They said, sir, could you give us a couple of more days? Well, I'm saying 2 or 3 days, maybe Friday, Saturday, Sunday, something, maybe early next week, a limited period of time.
Iran's army spokesman Mohammad Akramania warned the Islamic Republic would open new fronts against the United States if it resumed its attacks. He added that Iran's military had used the ceasefire as an opportunity to strengthen its combat capabilities.
Well, U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance, who negotiated with Iran in failed talks in Pakistan, also said that the United States was locked and loaded, but voiced hope for a diplomatic solution.
We think that we've made a lot of progress. We think the Iranians want to make a deal. The President of the United States has asked us to negotiate in good faith, and that's exactly what we've done. So we're in a pretty good spot here, but there's an option B. And the option B is that we could restart the military campaign to continue to prosecute the case, to continue to try to achieve America's objectives. And we could talk a little bit about what that looks like, but that's not what the president wants.
Latest reports and events in Israel also hint at possible resumption of war. According to a news report, Israeli diplomat believes that Tel Aviv is closest ever to restarting the attack on Iran.
But if the war resumes, Gulf states could once again face Iranian attacks. Iranian hardline figures have already escalated their rhetoric against UAE, accusing the country of supporting U.S. military operations. And this by hosting American bases. UAE was rattled by a drone attack on its Baraka nuclear power plant last week. And it said on Tuesday that it originated from Iraqi territory, where Iran-backed troops accused of launching attacks on Gulf nations in the war. The UN Security Council on Tuesday condemned the attack. Russia, which often defends Iran, joined the other members.
All right, for more on this, we're now being joined live by Dr. Charles Kupchan from Washington, D.C. He is a senior fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations. Dr. Kupchan, thanks so much for making time, joining us here on World DNA. Let's start right off. Again, we've heard this in the past, that we're close to a deal, but strikes can start again. But we've also seen strikes starting on Iran, when it suddenly started on the 28th of February. At this point, both sides are wanting to achieve that deal from a position of strength. How do you see this one starting off or ending?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've seen a significant shift in the U.S. position in the last 48 hours. Had we had this conversation last week, I didn't see real signs that President Trump was getting ready to go back to the battlefield. Last couple of days, he's indicated that he almost restarted the bombing campaign this week on Tuesday. Now he said the Gulf allies have asked him to wait, so he's going to see where we are at the end of the week. But in some ways, Trump is boxing himself in. He needs the Iranians to step forward with a serious plan, something that shows real compromise on the key issues, because otherwise I think Trump will feel a lot of pressure to make good on his pledge. Now, would that be another month, another 2 months? Who knows? Maybe it would be a limited military operation in an effort to convince Iran to make concessions and accommodations at the negotiating table.
Right, Dr. Kaptran, and we do understand that the Washington stance has shifted over the last 48 hours. And in fact, in the latest, J.D. Vance has said that, Washington is locked and loaded to restart military operations if there is no deal. How are you reading into these comments? Because this is threat and diplomacy playing out parallelly. And it has been like that for a while now. Where do you see it going from here?
Well, I think that the theory of the case during the ceasefire was we hit Iran hard militarily. Now let's hit them hard economically. Let's enforce the blockade. Let's prevent Iran from selling its oil. Let's strangle its economy. And Trump wanted to give time for that economic strategy to work. The problem is that at least now it looks like Iran has more staying power than the United States does, in part because we're continuing to see the price of gas go up. We're continuing to see President Trump's popularity and approval ratings go down. We're continuing to see, you just mentioned this, Republicans are defecting from supporting the war and saying, okay, yes, let's debate this in Congress. So he's feeling a lot of pressure, political pressure here at home. And that has led to, I think, more impatience on his part. And that's why I think we're seeing this move to what could be a restart of the war sometime within the next week or so.
Dr. Gupchan, ever since that ceasefire, regardless of how fragile it is, more and more reports have showcased the kind of damage US took regarding, and these are all US reports suggesting that US bases across West Asia, they were hit at least 228 sites across their bases. A lot of their jets were damaged. This is again a congressional report which has come out. This is from the Congress itself about the aircraft combat losses. They are pegging it at 42 aircraft that were lost during this operation. Iran has been mentioning a lot about what kind of damage they were able to inflict, regardless of all the damage they took. Do you feel that will be playing a role in any kind of a resumption of military operations again on Iran, given the fact that many times we've heard Donald Trump mention that Iran put up a big fight?
Yeah, I mean, since the ceasefire took hold, we have had a lot of information come out that suggests that the initial U.S.-Israeli wave of attacks was not as successful as was reported. We're hearing not just, as you were saying, that a lot of bases in the region were hit, a lot of oil installations in Gulf allies were hit, but two additional pieces of information that are, I think, quite important here. One is that the United States has spent down its own weapons supply, especially of long-range missiles, of Tomahawks, of Patriot missiles, things that are difficult to replace. And then the other piece of news that we've seen over the last week is how much of Iran's military capability is preserved. We're hearing that a substantial portion of its missile force is still operational, that 30 of 33 missile bases along the Strait of Hormuz on the coast of Iran are still operational. So there are still a lot of targets there. I do think that this kind of groundwork is giving Trump pause. And that's why he has been reluctant to go back to the battlefield. But at least judging by what he said yesterday and today, that does appear to be where we're headed, unless there is a major move by Iran in the negotiations.
Right, Dr. Kaptran, and we also understand that the theater is expanding because now that we have Vladimir Putin in Beijing, and this is shortly after Trump was hosted by Xi Jinping, and we also understand that the Iran war is going to feature quite prominently, like it had featured with Trump. How do you think that is going to affect the future trajectory of the conflict from here on? Because China has definitely emerged, in comparison to Washington, as a more stabilizing force in some way, which is also hinting at a multipolar world order. How do you see that affecting the Iran war pan out from here on?
I think that we don't know what went on behind closed doors when Trump was in Beijing last week, but it does appear that not much progress was made on convincing China to help the United States put pressure on Iran. Because if that were the case, if Trump came home from Beijing confident that he could count on Xi Jinping to turn the screws on Tehran, I think he would not today be talking about restarting the military campaign. And the Chinese, they suffer from this war because they rely upon oil exported from the Persian Gulf. They don't like it when the global economy slows down, but they're not unhappy that the United States is mired yet again in a war in the Middle East. And they're not unhappy that they are able to take the narrative of the country that is standing for peace and negotiations while the United States is again resorting to force. So I think the Chinese, for now, see this as a war that isn't so bad for their interests.
Understood. Dr. Charles Kupchan, thanks so much for making time for us. Always a pleasure speaking with you. There will be more to discuss. There isn't really a clear horizon on this yet. We'll wait and watch how this one pans out.
Good to be with you. Bye-bye.